Welcome. Welcome one and all. My name is Ashley Rubinski. This is the start of something new, and we want you to find this a source of insights on what is important to your aerospace and defense customer and a source of information to aid in advancing your ESG position. If you're joining from the supply chain, we want to make sure you see how you connect and how we can improve our collaboration on the topic of ESG. If you're with industry or a functional partner within IAEG member companies, again, this is a source for enhanced collaboration. We recognize that everyone is on the journey to a more robust ESG posture and that we may all be at different stages, which is where the opportunity lies to grow together. So thank you for being here for the start. What we're going to do first is Jim Wilson, partner at Webster, Chamberlain and Bean, and IAEG General Counsel, will be reviewing our compliance reminders. See these compliance reminders as the secret sauce, as someone wise once said, to what allows us to come together to collaborate. Over to you, Jim.
Thanks very much, Ashley. As Ashley mentioned, I'm Jim Wilson, partner at Webster, Chamberlain and Bean in Washington, D.C. I am outside general counsel to IAEG. As part of performing general counsel services to IAEG, one of the things that we always remind participants in any IAEG program of are certain compliance reminders that IAEG as a trade association has to follow. We have some compliance slides that I'll go through next. IAEG, previous slide please. IAEG has governance policies in place, including an antitrust compliance policy, which is very important when trade associations like IAEG perform activities, given that they're composed of competitors. We always distribute an agenda before meetings like this, and we stick to that agenda. We also adhere to conflict of interest procedures. As a trade association, IAEG does not get into any discussion and certainly no agreement when it comes to competitive terms of business amongst the membership or others in the industry. We don't tolerate any discussion or agreement on any sort of restraints on competition of any kind. Whether or not to comply with a standard, whether or not to use an IAEG program or deliverable is a unilateral and voluntary decision for each individual company to make. There are no mandatory participation requirements in any IAEG program or activity. Completely out of bounds for any IAEG program or discussion is prices or discussions about prices or wages. We also avoid any sort of disclosure of non-public, competitively sensitive information like business relationships between suppliers and customers, and certainly no discussion of specific terms of business. Next slide, please. Out of bounds as well as any sort of export controlled technical data or any other member proprietary information. We also minimize, for GDPR compliance reasons, any collection of personal information. We limit that to collecting only information necessary to allow those who are interested to participate in our programs. The guidelines that I've just reviewed apply to our formal meetings, but they also apply in informal settings at IAEG. During coffee breaks and other breaks, we also adhere to these guidelines. Assuming that there are no questions, I will turn it back to you, Ashley, for the substantive portion of the presentation.
Thank you. So let me ask a question. We'll launch the first poll where we're interested to find out, coming into this webinar, did you know about IAEG and Workgroup 11? So that poll should have appeared. If you could please go to that poll and enter your response, that will certainly help us. Either way, whether you are coming in knowing IAEG and Workgroup 11, or if this is all new, you're going to walk away with additional insights you didn't know before. And although this agenda does not allow for a live Q&A, you can be submitting questions using the platform and we will have them addressed post-event. In addition, we will also be having the polling that we're having now and post-event survey to gather your feedback. So there will be plenty of chances to have your voice heard. Thank you for taking that poll to help inform us. Moving on to the IAEG overview. When I think about explaining what IAEG is, it is unprecedented collaboration between fierce competitors. Since last year, we are now addressing all aspects of ESG and sustainability issues in addition to where we started as an organization 10 years ago with environmental. Want to highlight the powerful signal. If you look at the bottom of the chart, you can start to see that the IAEG members comprise 70% of the global aerospace and defense industry. When I think of ESG, I think about it as signaling our values. And when you think about the numbers there on that chart, that is a critical mass and what a signal it is. We aim to contribute to the aerospace industry with all that is conducted and brought forward. The efficient voluntary solutions, as Jim mentioned, are geared towards adding value across the value chain. And so this webinar, as well as much other information, is being brought to you under the IAEG umbrella. Let's move on to our agenda. Our agenda consists of this panel and then some closing remarks, which will also highlight Workgroup 11 specifically, which is the newest work group in the IAEG family. We are going to go to the panel currently, and I want to introduce the panel. You can certainly refer to the bios of each of the panelists on the platform, and hopefully you saw that as you registered. So with us today, we have Nicholas Creation from Airbus, Head of Sustainability and Environment, Geraldine Barnevaux from GE Aviation, Head of Sustainability, David Graber, Boeing Supply Chain Sustainability Senior Manager, also an IAEG Board of Director member and a Workgroup 11 co-sponsor. Christian Boller, partner from Roland Berger, and myself moderating, Ashley Rubinski from Lockheed Martin as a Senior Project Manager on Supply Chain Operations and Sustainability. Welcome, panel.
Welcome, and thank you for inviting us here.
Our first question. Nicholas, you're going to start us off. How do you view ESG and why is it important to an organization and or our industry?
Well, thanks for the question, Ashley. When we look at ESG in the broader sense and sustainability, obviously it's about reducing our negative environmental and social impact. So I'm glad, by the way, that we managed to extend the remit of the IAEG forum into extending not just around the environmental aspects, but also the social aspects. It's also about enabling positive ones, but also ensuring appropriate governance. That means how do we conduct our business in alignment with our core company values? When I look at recent history in the industry, some of the biggest recent company failures, they're not necessarily linked to the lack of profitability. They're actually linked to ESG matters, poor governance. And this is also a reason why we have placed a strong focus on safety and integrity at Airbus. So as a first step, I would say you could look at ESG also about mitigating certain risks that are inherent to our business and to the activities and their impact they generate on the environment and on the human side through the social factor. If I look, for instance, at the current EU energy crisis, in a sense, decarbonizing our energy sources is a de-risking of our exposure to fossil energy, and with it, geopolitical instability, price volatility. Now, to better assess environmental and social risks, we need also data. We need greater transparency, hence why the Working Group 11 is key, to enable a more standardized and harmonized framework to assess ESG risks across our value chain. And I must say, we are starting off probably a point as a sector and as a whole, which is probably weaker compared to other sectors such as the auto industry. Now, it's about risk mitigation, but I think beyond this, and that's also a reason why it's not just important for Airbus or for the sector, but it's important for society at large. In the midst of the COVID crisis, the World Economic Forum had mentioned the notion of the Great Reset, or the shift from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. In a sense, our long-term success depends on creating value for all key stakeholders and working within planetary boundaries. And we have to recognize the fact that strong ESG performance leads to strong financial, reputational, and also human performance, employee engagement. So in Airbus, we sort of have done our own great rethink in 2019. We've revamped our company purpose, and we've placed sustainability at the heart of the company strategy. We now want to pioneer sustainable aerospace for a safe and united world, and we've tried to integrate sustainability and to deeply root it into the business strategy. We have defined 4 main commitments that are linked to these ESG elements. So leading the journey towards clean aerospace around environment, in a sense, embedding human rights across our value chain, and hopefully we'll see how the Working Group 11 can help also define a more standardized approach towards social assessment. And we're also focusing our efforts on exemplifying business integrity and building our business on the foundation of safety. Those 4 commitments, they are inherent to what we do as a business. We've placed also sustainability at the highest level of the company. So we now have oversight at the board level. We have aligned our targets in line with stakeholder expectations. So we now have actually submitted climate targets on all of our scopes. So that's engaging the broader value chain with the Science-Based Target Initiative. And the priority now is actually in driving this in all areas of the business and across the full value chain. So for us, a key question is how can we engage our own supply chain in helping us reach these targets, and hence why this forum is so important for us.
Wow, well said, Nicholas. Thank you very much. Geraldine, same question. How do you view ESG, and why is it important for our organization and our industry?
Thank you, Ashley, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. Well, I'm gonna, go a little bit. A few years ago, most of us put environmental, social, and governance topics in separate compartments from profitability. There was a widespread feeling that green funds or investing with responsible angles will never make money. Now, but forward to today, the regulators are pressing for increasing focus on the environmental, social, and governance, or ESG. Aspects of risk management are becoming a key on making investment decisions. So if you look at our investors, they are not looking at ESG just of something that we need to do as a responsible company, but looking at the risks that come from climate, from the social aspects, so on and so forth. In 5 years' time, it may be unthinkable that ESG risks wasn't always considered by corporate boards, investors, and regulators. So you can see the progression, on ESG from just a few years ago to now, and what we are seeing in the future. So although the EPs, climate, tends to hold the limelight, as social and governance are just as important. Just an example, an investment in green energy infrastructure may move us towards a low carbon economy, but if the materials used for that are made using child or forced labor, it is not an ESG-friendly investment. So it's really, the ESG are really interconnected. We are doing this to take care of our planet, but we're taking care of our planet for our people. Arguably, the G is the first one to consider them. Without good governance, environmental and social aspects will never be handled adequately. So that is the connection between E, S, and G. To me, at heart, ESG is about creating a tangible, practical plan that achieves real results. And the issues are so big and so broad that we cannot do it alone. We need to work together in the industry with our suppliers, with our peers to create meaningful change. Success is not just about climate change, diversity, and disclosures alone. It's about embedding these principles across our businesses, bringing together our best people, our smartest technologies so that we can see more, go deeper, and act swiftly. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you, Geraldine. I will say, I have to say about the best people and the talent, the seed of the idea of having this forum at an industry level actually came originally from a summer intern project. So just like you said, making sure we're engaging the best people and our new talent as well across all levels. So thank you for highlighting that. David, over to you for your thoughts.
Hi, Ashley. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to answer this question as well today. When we think about what is sustainability, we should keep sight of probably a very simple operational definition, and that is meeting the needs of today while protecting the ability for others to meet needs in the future. And then as we do that in a way that accounts for environmental stewardship, social progress, and also that transparent way that we run the business from the governance perspective. Globally, and how we navigate various external stakeholder expectations of investors, non-governmental organizations, general public. But it's also important to demonstrate how we are going above and beyond compliance obligations and showing a stewardship positive change, whether those are environmental matters or social matters. These are all things that become part of the future of safe and sustainable aerospace, where we need to be seen at the general definition of a business in terms of out here to grow the industry. I also see where with this tremendous industry growth in front of us and how we do this in a way that continues to enable the jobs around the world, the global economy that we support and enable through our products, but also from a defense perspective of enabling national security, humanitarian missions, peacekeeping, things of that sort. And as we move forward, thinking about those ESG aspects and how we run the business to keep our industry going and doing it in a way where we're seen as positive global citizens. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you, David. All right. And I think even it came up already through the thread of how is ESG changing the landscape of operations. So it feeds well right into our next panelist. Christian.
Ashley, thank you so much. Just a quick check. I hope you can hear me well, because we had some issues with the connection. Seems to be stable, right?
Yes.
Perfect. So thank you so much for having invited me, and specifically with that question, which I really like to answer, because I'm since 15, 16 years somebody who is working actively in the operations functions in R&D and procurement and so on. And that's why I might even be a bit biased, but I truly believe that operations has the biggest impact on all the ESG functions, or most of the ESG dimensions. And even vice versa, operations has to change significantly just because there is this new demand of sustainability now. And I have brought a few slides, just giving a bit of background on what I want to talk about. And I actually skipped the first page because this has been discussed by my previous speakers. So operations impacts sustainability and vice versa. And what we even believe is that sustainability is the fourth element of the typical operations dimension. So You all know this old world of the triangle, optimizing quality, delivery, and cost. We believe there's a fourth element now, and the triangle becomes a square where sustainability is not just sitting somewhere on the side with some little impact here or there, but that it's actually an equally important target operations functions have to fulfill, like the three others. And that, when we now look at the next page and see what that means in terms of the sustainability criteria, I still see the page with the triangle. Now I see the other one as well. On the left-hand side, you see an example of how ESG can be broken down into here. It is 15 criteria in the ES and the G function. And we have highlighted those where we believe operations has an impact, or where operations is impacted by ESG criteria. And you basically can see that the full wheel is full of color, because there's not a single area, be it emissions, be it human rights, or be it also handling the supply chain, where the operations functions have to do something. And when you look at the right-hand side, and if you would zoom in and if you could read what is written there in really tiny letters, or apologies for that, you can see that every function, starting with innovation and going through the whole value chain up to the supply, to after sales, every function has now specific questions and challenges ahead of them. And I'd like just to highlight a few of them. On the left-hand side, in innovation, of course, the innovation department needs to understand what are the customers' expectations now, what are the criteria and specifications which are needed for doing the right research on ESG topics. When we look at product development, of course, the same question. Product development may have the most central role in making products sustainable, because product development defines what a product will consume during the use phase, in terms of, for example, energy, if rare earths or other conflict minerals are being used or not. And all of this is being defined at the very beginning of the development process. Speaking about procurement, and this is here basically also the centerpiece of our discussion, we are having procurement steers the supply chain and makes sure that all the sustainability criteria a company has set for themselves are also met all along the value chain, and not only at the tier 1 suppliers, but up until the raw material suppliers, essentially. Production, of course, has to face is faced with the question how to realize a completely green production facility. Many of you might have heard the term of a dark lights factory, which means doing a lot of automation and also unfortunately getting rid of people on the shop floor, because automation, of course, also can improve the condition of workers in some uncomfortable areas. The supply chain and the after sales are, of course, also topics where sustainability is having a strong impact, speaking about also possibilities on spare parts, not having all of them on stock, but rather producing them, maybe also 3D printed, and avoiding a lot of scrap. So there are a lot of things going on in all these functions. And then what you see on the bottom of the slide is that there are also some common challenges all these functions do have. And that is basically summarized with the question, how to make sure that decarbonization targets are met end to end, how to enable your teams and your people in all the functions, because you can only meet ESG targets if your people believe in it and do have the tools and know how to actually work on the right things to shape a better future for the firm, to reach targets, and so on. And the very last slide on the next page is going into just 3 examples a bit in more detail, and I would say these are the cross-functional overarching topics. And from my perspective, the 3 most important things many companies look at when they speak about sustainability in operations. The first one is the question of decarbonization, end to end, from raw material supply through the own production to the use phase and up to recycling afterwards. And then also circular economy, speaking about using recycled material and using renewable materials to avoid that the earth is further exploited in an unnecessary way, maybe. And the third one, especially in Europe, currently a super high and important topic, the question on the human rights. The German Supply Chain Act is becoming effective in 2 months. The European one will come some years later, but will probably be even stricter than the German one. And that is putting a lot of pressure on every player in the industry and in the value chain to make sure that human rights are met. And I'd like to leave you with these 3 hot topics, and I think if everybody is working on these 3, we will have a lot of impact on a positive ESG.
Well, thank you, Christian. I think our panelists so far have already hit on a lot of the major themes on the why of ESG and even stakeholder engagement, how critical that is, not only just in the supply chain, but across the functions, as you mentioned, Christian. So thank you very much. I think, Nicholas, you mentioned, and Geraldine, you're going to address this, is aerospace may be seen as lagging compared to other industries in this space, and which is why it's so important to accelerate and come together to do so. Geraldine, I know you're one of the newest IAEG board members and would like to get your perspectives if you have experience in other industries on how have other industries tackled ESG engagement.
Thank you for the question, Ashley. Well, I joined GE Aerospace in July of this year. Before that, I spent 20 years with General Motors in the auto industry, and I led the sustainability team during the last 4 years. So I have seen some of this playing in a different industry. The engagement between OEMs and suppliers is becoming a real force for the sustainability transformation in the auto industry. And why is that? I think that the auto industry has been under a lot of scrutiny for the last 10, 20 years. Given the fact that, the light duty and heavy duty transportation combined is the single largest source of greenhouse gases in the US, rightly so. There is a lot of regulation and pressure and expectations on this industry. Just to give you an idea, the new corporate average fuel economy standard published in the US this year requires industry-wide fleet average of approximately 49 miles per gallon for passengers, cars, and light-duty vehicles in model year 2026. The new standard will increase fuel efficiency 8% annually for model years 2024, 2025, and 10% for model 2026. So there is, the regulation is a real force and that has created, this need for change. And so companies are quickly moving towards different, electrification, for example, and it's the right thing to do, but it's also a matter of survival. So I think that in our industry, we have not seen that yet. And I think that it's coming, when it's maybe 5 years, 10 years, but we should learn from these other industries and get prepared, right? So we don't have to rush to take action. In addition to that, what the auto industry faces in common with other industries, these enhanced sustainability, all these sustainability compliance mandates in all other ESG categories. Somebody just talked about human rights, right? That have created this unprecedented need to have trust and collaborate in the industry, which is exactly what we're trying to do here, to create a forum where we can collaborate and support our suppliers. We need to work together, and some may be a little bit behind, so how we bring everybody up and create this ecosystem where we help each other. So to me, there are 3 things that the auto industry did really well that we are also trying to do here in our industry, here in our forum. So achieve alignment. All the industry participants, we need to align to what are the goals and milestones and be comfortable with that. Some are going to be ahead, some are going to be behind, so how do we get everybody to a certain level and what are the milestones? We need to rethink supply chain we saw in the auto industry how the chip crisis almost, put the industry on their knees, right? So having this, looking at ESG from the lenses of risk, and it's super important. Rethinking for the auto industry, the end of life of the vehicle, is really important, So looking beyond compliance, looking beyond the typical ESG topics is going to be critical. And what we are doing is that what IAEG has been doing for 20 years in the auto industry, and what we are doing here, building practices, norms. So we have a playbook, right? And that we can help others, but also at the same time, keep our ability to compete is important. So I think that we are trying to do all of these things, and I am super excited to be part of the board and help a little bit, bringing experience from another industry. But if we collaborate in the right way, we will pave the way for a cross-industry transformation that, and we can create, the right atmosphere for us to learn and grow and make big change happen.
Excellent. Yes, it is an exciting time, isn't it, for IAEG and for our supply chain, now that we're coming together and we can leverage best practices. And I will say, as you brought up, with the automotive industry being driven because of scrutiny and regulation, our next webinar, that was the second in the pair that we hope that you come back and register for, is focused on that, on what is driving our industry to take action. And a lot of that is with regulation. So we want to make sure we're sharing and building a foundational awareness of what those regulations are today and what we see emerging. So hopefully that gives you a good reason to register for the November 16th event. Thank you, Geraldine. All right, now we're going to move on to, we've focused a lot on the why of ESG, and there was hints throughout that as far as the stakeholders are critical, and at the heart of success is bringing together the stakeholders. So now we're just going to focus a little bit more on what are the different stakeholder groups and why is engagement with them important on the topic of ESG. Nicholas, back to you.
Thank you, Ashley. And we heard a number of things that are showing. One thing is that we see more and more convergence actually towards stakeholder expectation. The first thing I wanted to say, though, is that it's extremely important when you look at ESG to take an outside-in view. And that's fundamental to bring what I would call cross-stakeholder value. I mentioned stakeholder capitalism. So clearly we are seeing from today's standpoint expectations towards greater engagement of the industry across a wide array of stakeholders, whether they're regulators, investors, customers, NGOs, general public. But a good thing at the same time is we see also a certain level of convergence on certain topics. And I was glad to hear from Christian, for instance, 3 key areas of focus, which are exactly the ones that we are focusing our efforts. The first one being climate. And climate is because if you look at the life cycle of an aircraft, if we start with aircraft, that's fundamentally the biggest impact, I would say, and we can't ignore this. This is not just obviously ignoring other elements, but that's by far an impact assessment. That's what we have as an overall activity. The good thing when we look at climate is that there is global convergence because there is a global framework under Paris Agreement. The concern we face is that whilst we probably have a way to come to a point towards net zero by 2050, and there are different paths to get there, and on this I'm glad that last week we were able to sort of institutionalize the sectoral roadmap and the industry roadmap on ATAG via the ICAO long-term aspirational goals to really enforce and guide some of the states and some areas in the world where there is maybe less momentum towards this net zero objective. What we are seeing, though, is that there is more and more pressure to not only align our goals with the so-called well below 2 degree scenario, but with a 1.5 degree scenario, which shouldn't help for a hard-to-abate sector like us, and with long lead cycles in our products, actually additional thoughts towards what could be additional solutions. And that's why we have to push also the exploratory phase further. That's also why we're looking for instance, on our end at hydrogen, for instance. So climate is clearly the main impact element, so climate being one. The second one is we see convergence also on the need to actually optimize the resource usage of our industry. If you look at it fundamentally and compare it with the auto industry, because we were talking about this is less of an impact constraint here, but this is more of a constraint towards supply chain, I would say, resilience and potential disruption. And it's about optimizing the efficiency of our industrial systems across the value chain. And it's about addressing the end-of-life challenge we face, because as we address the climate challenge, as we accelerate transition, we will have to retire more airplanes, and the question will be what is happening with those airplanes that we have to early retire. And when we talk about resource usage, the main, I would say, lever and enabler is enhancing the traceability on substance and materials, and trying to enact what I label, and this is the framework that exists and that is being developed in Europe, not only safe products, and we have a commitment to safety in our industry, but safe and sustainable by design products. So what does that mean for our industry? Climate, resource usage, and the third one, I think, where we see convergence as well, convergence from a regulatory standpoint is on corporate due diligence and human rights due diligence framework, the so-called devoir de vigilance in France, the German Lieferkettengesetz that you highlighted, Christian, and this is being developed more broadly. Here again, the need for more transparency and standardized approach. And I think those three elements in the end are really the ones that we should be focusing our efforts. It's important to engage with all stakeholders to anticipate and clarify expectations. We see quite a moving dynamic, as I was saying, on the regulatory front. It's also important that we engage with stakeholders sometimes to bridge the perception gap. I think we are suffering as an industry of a perception gap versus what we have committed to. And if you look at our industry having made a bold commitment towards net zero 2050, there's a huge gap versus the constant aviation bashing that we all face as well. There aren't that many industries that have taken as an industry a commitment to work together on common goals. And I think we have to work collectively here, because there are no winners and losers, on bridging that perception gap. So what does this mean concretely at Airbus? Well, we are engaging on continuous dialogue, first with our own investors, with banks, with analysts. So we perform ESG roadshows. In our last Capital Market Day, by the way, ESG was front and centered, and we had to talk about two of the main topics I mentioned. So climate, but also on the defense side, ESG and defense and human rights matters. We now have actually even credit lines that are linked to ESG metrics. So we have better interconnected the way we can secure funding to our ESG performance. We are engaged with institutions, governments, regulators, and I'm very happy that collectively we could succeed at ICAO, but we still have a lot to do, and sometimes also to fight regulation, which is, I would say, trying to put unnecessary hurdles in terms of reporting and not necessarily incentivizing what are key enablers. And I see actually here a different paradigm between what's happening in the US and Europe, for instance, where we have a very prescriptive framework in Europe, whereas we have more of an incentivizing framework in the US with respect to sustainable aviation fuel, for instance. It's also about engaging with our employees, and we have developed actually a continuous dialogue with our social partners. There's a strong ask, I would say, from our employees. It can be a vehicle of engagement at difficult time. And on our end, we've actually developing even a community impact platform to not only connect our employees to what is our business strategy on ESG, but also we are connecting them with 2 million plus NGOs into our local communities to see how we can better support making use of what is the best asset of the company, which are our employees. We're also talking to NGOs, and the dialogue is not always easy, but we can witness positive collaboration. I mean, on my end, I took part in the platform on sustainable finance at the European Commission. The taxonomy framework is restrictive, but we managed to actually link in some of the criteria to what hopefully can enable the climate transition of the sector by incentivizing fleet renewals and SAF take-up. So there is a dialogue that can be established with some NGOs to try to build something which makes sense in terms of our roadmaps and action plans. And what we are seeing as well is that we are seeing much more also engagement on sustainability matters with our customers, with our airline customers in particular. Sustainability is more and more at the center of our discussion. And we see more and more airlines that are themselves committed to science-based targets. So they have set their own climate targets, have taken up agreement, and we need to be able to respond to this as an industry. And then finally, obviously, and this is the importance of this forum here, with our suppliers, we have defined actually a dedicated sustainable supply chain roadmap to really better engage our suppliers. But I truly believe in the value of driving this at sectoral level and not to duplicate efforts at different company levels, specifically when we are looking at enhancing data transparency, due diligence. So hopefully here again, a good opportunity through the Working Group 11.
Wonderful. All right, David, your thoughts on the different stakeholder groups and why engagement is so important.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. I think Nicholas gave a wonderful response here, covering quite a holistic view on the question in front of us. But I think in these various stakeholder groups, there's an internal set of our employees and how we engage their hearts and minds to drive transformation, what they're looking for in companies to work for, and talent retention. There's also just how you have to drive transformation in the business by getting out and engaging the various functional roles in your internal stakeholder set. And from that external view, we already heard it mentioned, but you have your investor communities, customers, we have regulators, we have general public, and then also suppliers. And on that focus of suppliers, again, Nicholas ended with this nicely about the importance of the power of engagement to align mental models of how we want to move forward as an industry to address some of the imperatives in front of us, how we can bring those various outside-in perspectives to this to be diverse in our thoughts and therefore better approaches of how we move forward with very challenging constructs in supply chains for emerging due diligence obligations, or as well referred to as duty of care laws, which are also commensurate with the expectations of the investor communities we interact with and our customers and whatnot, as we're all interlinked in the value chain, enabling their own compliance obligations and how they show up in the eyes of. So for me, the environmental stewardship and those social components, particularly again honing in on human rights and the way our industry operates, and it all begins with good engagement. Good dialogue, diverse thinking, harmonization and alignment, moving towards things like Work Group 11 is doing in IAEG with voluntary standards of supplier sustainability assessment, and how we can also begin to align on understanding what these most important risks are from a sustainability point of view, again, in the context of supply chains, looking at environmental and social matters that are most important to us and our industry's license to operate. And fundamentally, this all starts with working together, getting that outside-in point of view, seeking perspectives of others, listening, and sharing our message as well. And that brings in another piece of the stakeholder community set that was mentioned earlier, and that's how, as we go down this journey from a supply chain perspective, we are bringing in the voice of the regulators, of investors, of customers, and other actors along the value chain to check in as we are defining roadmaps and future objectives to make sure that we're being in the aerospace supply chain. Thank you, Ashley.
Thanks, David. And I know even with the little audio gap, I had interjected around harmonizing and you came right back on and said the same word. So I hope everyone can start to see we truly are harmonizing, and that's where we're going to get the power to accelerate for our industry collectively. And I really do appreciate all the panelists that have been bringing these perspectives forward to you today. We want to just land on more of how can IAEG demonstrate supply chain stewardship? Well, really, it comes down to today. This was a starting point. This originally was kind of an aspiration. Could we have a forum around ESG in our aerospace sector? Can we come together and certainly know We want to hear from you. We can learn from you equally as sharing with you. And so going forward, what you'll see is today is the start. November, we want to drive home around those regulations that were brought up consistently to make sure we all have an opportunity to build a foundational awareness of what is out there today and what we see ahead. We want to leverage the best practices. IAEG has been doing amazing work under environmental for 10 years and delivering value. And now that Work Group 11 is established, we can now extend that same value across all aspects of ESG. It's a perfect equation for success and acceleration. We want to build that obligation. That's that one there. I'm giving a hint to what 2023 may bring because we're asking you to buckle up and be prepared to take off with us as a community. And then enhance with ongoing feedback. Again, there will be a post-event survey. You know the individuals who are speaking. Certainly reach out to our organizations. We will be addressing your questions. If your question is, can I get a copy of these charts? That is a yes. You can do that during this time here and download it, but it will also be made available post-event. So to conclude on the stewardship side, I always do the analogy of health. We all know our health is our wealth. And in cases we go to doctors and we get tests and there's numbers or there's, that we read. And if we only did that portion, we could get healthier. But if you put on in parallel the tools and the community of learning how to change those numbers, now you can reach that optimal health. And that's what we're trying to do here in IAEG, specifically Work Group 11, is give you tools for measuring, but then also supplement with knowledge and information and a sense of community to help you along the journey to accelerate ESG. And so we're excited that today was our starting point. I'm going to now turn things over to our Workgroup 11 leaders, Mark and Phil, Mark Walker and Phil Godfrey, to tell you a little bit more about Workgroup 11, but through the lens of the themes of today's event.
Thanks, Ashley. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I have a message that I can't be seen, but if you can hear me, that's a good sign. So, fascinating discussion so far and great insights from many different perspectives on why is ESG important. I just want to share with everybody a little bit more about this Work Group 11 you've been hearing about. What is it? So, it's all about ESG engagement in the aerospace supply chain. ESG engagement en route to improvement. But before we can really do that, we must first of all define a little bit about common terms. What do we mean by ESG and how do we measure it? And you can see here that that is one of our first goals. If I progress to the next slide, we have a sort of short version, reusable sustainability assessment, which is the sort of 3-word title I use to describe to people who ask, what are you doing first? So if you look on the left-hand side of this description of Work Group 11 on one page, there's the motivations for what we're doing, the why. And that's what we've been talking about so far. And then we've been working together as a team this year on the piece in the middle, which has been to define a common set of requirements, how we might go about requesting proposals for a third-party supplier to help us provide our vision of reusable sustainability assessments. And the great news is that we have made rapid progress. We have searched far and wide, and we have got down to the 2 finalists, and we expect to be announcing a winner very soon. And that's the output on the right-hand side of the page that just wanted to give you a teaser here of what we're going to be covering in future supplier engagements with Workgroup 11. But if I can just go to the next slide, I wanted to just share with you one of the slides that we've used to make sure that we try and capture some value here in the proposition for all of the different stakeholders. And of course, I want to focus on that bottom right-hand box, the supplier perspective. Now, by day, I work for Collins Aerospace. By night, I work for IAEG. Collins Aerospace is a customer and it's a supplier. As a supplier, we noticed that we were getting requests for lots of different sustainability assessments. And we looked into this and we found that there were 59 different assessments in Europe alone. And we and many others in IAEG came to the vision that, wouldn't it be very valuable to have a single reusable assessment? So proposition to a supplier then is you can get this sustainability assessment done once. It'll be valuable to you. You can use it again with your many different suppliers, and in the IAEG, anyone participating in the IAEG aerospace sector level initiative will recognize that standard of assessment, recognize it, accept it, welcome it. So that is, in a nutshell, what Workgroup 11 is all about, and roughly where we've got to. I want to just invite Mark Walker, my co-leader of Workgroup 11. Mark, is there anything you want to add to that and current status, if you're able to?
So, providing you can hear me, I hope you can.
We can.
Excellent. So, hello everyone, really pleased to be here and thank you for attending. Nothing really to add, maybe just to repeat and emphasize. So we've heard all of the compelling reasons of why we all need to engage on this journey. We heard at the beginning from Ashley that we're all at different stages of this journey. I think many of us with the best intentions have approached our respective supply chains and asked you a set of questions, sometimes through different tools, sometimes through different providers. And our real ambition is to make sure, because we often have common suppliers, often you work for different industries as well. We heard about automotive. And what we really want to do is develop this common language and this common approach so that everything is more sustainable in every sense of the word sustainable. So we're nearly there, as Phil said. We're quite excited that we'll be announcing shortly who we believe is the best provider to do that. And as soon as we're in a position to do that, we'll be sharing that with you, and hopefully we can all benefit and move forward together.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Now we're going to ask our last poll as we look to close the event. What we want to know now is, did this webinar provide you meaningful insights that resonated with the challenges you're facing? We'd like to hear that so we get a good gauge coming out of today's meeting on where we might want to head as we're learning on establishing and navigating having this new forum. So it's really critical that your voice gets heard. And up on the screen right now, if you're hungry for more, just pointing you in the direction of more information on Workgroup 11. And what you really see on this screen is some additional leadership perspectives on ESG from a prior event that on that website you can go ahead and see the outcomes and key highlights that all tie to the why of ESG. We want to make sure that you best understand the voice of your aerospace and defense customers in the supply chain. And as members of those companies, get everyone more enthused and inspired to collaborate in what it's going to take. As we heard throughout this conversation, it's going to take that highest level of collaboration and coming together, because not any one of us has the answer, but together we will build and shape that future where those answers come about. So thank you for your participation. We hope that you do follow up and follow IAEG on LinkedIn to ensure that you get the latest and greatest news across this great organization that we all contribute to, and that you look forward to marking your calendar for the next webinar where we discuss the why. Now we're going to be discussing the what. What is driving us to act? So you're going to hear more about that regulation and due diligence, duty of care obligations that you started to hear about today. So we hope to see you back here in November. And until then, thank you for your time and stay well.